He shared his sandwich with the old alien woman, never knowing she owned the galaxy. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. On a cramped docking platform of the Meridian Station, orbiting somewhere between human space and the sprawling territories of the Galactic Coalition, a maintenance worker named Ethan Cole sat on a metal crate, unwrapping his lunch. The station hummed with the usual chaos of 100 species coming and going, merchants haggling over prices in a dozen different languages, the hiss of hydraulic systems, the clang of cargo containers being loaded and unloaded, and the constant background drone of the environmental systems that kept this massive structure habitable. But Ethan had learned long ago to find his quiet moments wherever he could, little pockets of peace in the controlled chaos of station life. Ethan Cole was nobody special, at least not by galactic standards. He was 28 years old, originally from a small colony world called New Haven that most people had never heard of. He had brown hair that was perpetually messy, gray eyes that had seen more than their fair share of equipment failures, and a lean build that came from years of squeezing through tight spaces. His uniform was standard-issue maintenance coveralls, dark blue with reflective strips and the Meridian Station logo on the shoulder, though his particular uniform had seen better days. There were grease stains that would not come out no matter how many times he washed it, a patch on one knee where he had torn it on a jagged piece of metal, and his name tag was slightly crooked because the adhesive had started to fail. He was a human maintenance worker on Meridian Station, one of thousands of beings from hundreds of species working to keep the massive hub operational. Meridian was a neutral ground, a place where different factions of the galaxy could meet, trade, negotiate, and sometimes argue without immediately starting a war. It was huge, easily 10 kilometers across at its widest point, with hundreds of levels, thousands of corridors, and a population that fluctuated between 50,000 and 100,000 depending on the day. And all of it needed constant maintenance. Power conduits failed, life support systems developed leaks, gravity plating malfunctioned, and waste recyclers clogged. That was where people like Ethan came in. His job involved crawling through access tunnels barely wider than his shoulders, repairing ventilation systems that pumped breathable air to a dozen different species with different atmospheric requirements, patching hull breaches that could vent entire sections into space if left unchecked, and occasionally fishing lost cargo out of the lower levels where the automated systems had glitched and dumped things into the wrong location. The pay was mediocre, barely enough to cover his tiny quarters and basic necessities. The work was dirty, uncomfortable, and often dangerous. And most days he went completely unnoticed by the station's more illustrious inhabitants. Diplomats in flowing robes glided past him without a glance. Traders in expensive suits stepped over his toolbox without breaking stride. Military officers in crisp uniforms looked through him as if he were invisible. They all passed through Meridian without giving a second thought to the people who kept the lights on, the air circulating, and the toilets flushing. To them, the station simply worked, as if by magic, and they never considered the hundreds of workers who made that magic happen. Ethan did not resent them, exactly. It was just the way things were. He had learned early in life that the universe was not particularly fair, and complaining about it would not change anything. So he did his job, kept his head down, and found satisfaction in the small victories. A successfully repaired power coupling, a ventilation system brought back online, a grateful nod from a fellow worker who appreciated a helping hand. These were the things that made his life worthwhile. Today had been particularly grueling, even by Ethan's standards. A cooling system had failed in Section 7, one of the residential areas that housed a group of Eons, a species that required temperatures significantly lower than most humanoids could tolerate. The failure had been catastrophic, with coolant leaking into the surrounding corridors and the temperature in the Thermian quarters rising to dangerously high levels. Ethan had spent 6 hours in a crawl space barely wider than his shoulders, his body contorted into positions that would have made a yoga instructor wince, replacing corroded piping while sweat dripped into his eyes and his back screamed in protest. The crawl space had been filled with the acrid smell of leaked coolant, a chemical odor that burned his nostrils and made his eyes water. His hands, despite the heavy work gloves, were covered in grease and grime, and he had scraped his knuckles raw on sharp metal edges more times than he could count. The job had been made even more difficult by the fact that the Thermians kept calling down through the access hatch, their voices high-pitched and anxious, asking how much longer it would take. Ethan understood their concern. After all, they were literally overheating in their quarters, but it did not make the work go any faster. He had done his best to reassure them, promising that he was working as quickly as he could, while simultaneously trying not to lose his grip on the wrench he was using to tighten the new pipe fittings. When he had finally finished, when the new pipes were in place and sealed, when the coolant was flowing again and the temperature in the Thermian quarters began to drop back to their comfortable range, the Thermians had thanked him profusely. They had even offered him a small token of appreciation, a crystalline sculpture that represented gratitude in their culture. Ethan had accepted it with a tired smile, promising to display it in his quarters, though in reality he had no idea where he would put it in his cramped living space. But now, finally, his shift was over. Or at least, it was supposed to be over. Ethan knew from experience that there was always a chance his supervisor would find him and assign him another emergency repair, another crisis that needed immediate attention. That was why he had come to this particular docking platform, one of the less trafficked areas of the station, where his supervisor was unlikely to look for him. It was his secret spot, a place where he could catch his breath and eat his lunch without being interrupted. His back ached, a deep, throbbing pain that radiated from his lower spine up to his shoulders. His hands were sore, his fingers stiff from gripping tools for hours. His eyes burned from the coolant fumes and from staring at tiny pipe fittings and dim lighting. All he wanted was 15 minutes of peace to eat his sandwich and try to summon the energy to make it back to his quarters, where he could collapse into his narrow bunk and sleep for the next 10 hours. 20, if he was lucky. The sandwich itself was nothing fancy, nothing that would impress anyone. It was exactly the kind of meal that someone on a tight budget ate when they were too tired to care about culinary excellence. Synthesized turkey, the kind that was grown in vats and had a texture that was almost, but not quite, like real meat. Some lettuce that had probably been grown in one of the hydroponics bays 3 decks down, wilted and slightly brown around the edges. A slice of processed cheese, bright yellow and plasticky, that tasted more like the idea of cheese than actual cheese. Mustard on bread that was only slightly stale, with a crust that had started to harden. The bread was the standard station issue, produced in bulk by the commissary and distributed to workers as part of their meal allowance. To anyone with refined tastes, it would have been barely edible. To Ethan, after 6 hours of brutal physical labor, it was a feast. He had learned to appreciate the small things during his 2 years on Meridian Station. A hot meal, a comfortable place to sit, a few minutes of quiet. These were luxuries that he never took for granted. He was halfway through his first bite, savoring the taste of mustard and synthesized turkey, when he noticed her. She was sitting on the deck not far from where he had claimed his crate, her back against a support pillar. The pillar was one of the massive structural supports that held this section of the station together, covered in peeling paint and plastered with old safety notices in multiple languages. She was clearly alien, though Ethan had seen enough species by now that he had stopped being surprised by new appearances. The galaxy was vast, and it contained more variations of intelligent life than any human could hope to catalog in a lifetime. Her skin had a faint bluish tint, almost gray, like the color of storm clouds before rain. It was covered in a fine network of lines that might have been wrinkles, or might have been something else entirely, perhaps some kind of natural pattern that her species developed with age. The lines were delicate, intricate, creating a web of subtle patterns across her face and hands. She was small, probably no taller than 1.5 meters if she stood up, and she was hunched over, her shoulders curved forward in a posture that spoke of exhaustion or resignation. Her clothing was tattered, little more than layered robes that had once been fine but had seen far better days. The fabric was faded, with patches sewn on in multiple places, and the hem was frayed and dirty, trailing on the deck beside her. What struck Ethan most, what made him pause mid-chew, were her eyes. They were large, disproportionately large for her face, almost luminous in quality. They were an amber color, but not a flat, simple amber. The color seemed to shift and change depending on the angle of the station's artificial lighting. sometimes appearing golden, sometimes more orange, sometimes with hints of red or brown. There was a depth to those eyes, an intelligence and awareness that seemed at odds with her beggar's appearance. Despite her clearly aged appearance, despite the weariness evident in every line of her body, those eyes held something sharp, something penetrating, something that made Ethan feel as though she could see right into his soul. She was staring at his sandwich. It was not an aggressive stare, not demanding or entitled. It was something else entirely. It was the stare of someone who was hungry, truly hungry, in a way that went beyond simple appetite. It was the look of someone who had gone too long without food, whose body was crying out for nourishment, whose mind was consumed by the simple, desperate need to eat. Ethan had seen that look before, back on Earth, during his childhood in the rougher parts of New Haven Colony. He had seen it in the faces of people who had lost their jobs, who had fallen through the cracks of society's safety net, who had been forgotten by a system that was supposed to care for them. Ethan paused mid-chew, suddenly very aware of the sandwich in his hand. The old alien woman did not look away. She did not blink, did not move. She just stared, her luminous amber eyes fixed on the food with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. There was no aggression in her gaze, no demand, no expectation. Just a quiet, profound hunger that Ethan recognized immediately because he had felt it himself, years ago, when times had been hard and meals had been uncertain. He glanced around the docking platform, looking at the usual crowd that flowed past in an endless stream. The platform was busy, as it always was. There were Dorvians in their segmented armor, moving with the heavy, deliberate steps of their species. There were Keltons, tall and elegant, their skin shimmering with iridescent patterns. There were Volosians, insectoid and precise, their mandibles clicking as they communicated. There were humans, of course, though not many, since humans were still relatively new to the galactic community. There were species that Ethan could not identify, beings with too many limbs or not enough, with skin colors that defied description, with body structures that seemed to violate basic biology. Hundreds of beings going about their business, rushing to catch shuttles or meet contacts or complete transactions. Merchants haggled with potential customers, their voices rising and falling in a cacophony of languages. Dockworkers guided cargo containers with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated despite the chaos around them. Station security officers strolled past in pairs, their eyes scanning for trouble, their hands resting casually on their weapons. It was the usual organized chaos of Meridian Station, a microcosm of the galaxy itself, where countless lives intersected for brief moments before diverging again. None of them seemed to notice the old woman. She was invisible to them, just another piece of the station's background, like the cargo crates stacked against the walls or the faded safety signs warning of explosive decompression. She might as well have been part of the deck plating for all the attention anyone paid her. People walked past within meters of her, close enough to trip over her if they were not watching where they were going, and not a single one of them looked down. Not a single one of them saw her. Except Ethan. He looked down at his sandwich, the bread slightly compressed from where his fingers had gripped it, the lettuce poking out from one side, the mustard leaving a faint yellow stain on his fingertips. He thought about how hungry he was, how much he had been looking forward to this meal, how his body needed the calories after 6 hours of brutal physical labor. He thought about how he did not have much money, how his next meal would probably be just as mediocre, how every credit he earned had to be carefully budgeted to cover his expenses. Then he looked back at the woman, at those haunting amber eyes, at the way her thin fingers clutched at the fabric of her tattered robes, at the way her body seemed to sag against the support pillar as if standing would require more energy than she possessed. Ethan sighed, a long, quiet exhalation that was part resignation, part something else. Something that might have been compassion or decency, or simply an inability to ignore someone in need. Well, he thought, I can always get another sandwich. The commissary will still be open. And really, how hungry am I compared to her? He stood up, his back protesting the movement, and walked over to where she sat. His boots made soft thuds against the deck plating, and she watched him approach, her expression unreadable. Up close, he could see more details. The lines on her skin were even more intricate than he had first thought. creating patterns that were almost beautiful in their complexity. Her hands, resting in her lap, were thin and delicate, the fingers long and graceful. There was something almost regal about her, despite her obviously desperate circumstances, as if she carried herself with a dignity that poverty could not quite erase. He stood up and walked over to where she sat. She watched him approach, her expression unreadable. When he got close enough, he knelt down and held out the sandwich. "Here," he said. "You look like you need this more than I do." The woman's eyes widened slightly. She stared at the sandwich, then at Ethan, then back at the sandwich. For a moment, she did not move, as if she could not quite believe what was happening. "Go ahead," Ethan said, offering an encouraging smile. "It is not much, but it is food." Slowly, almost reverently, the old woman reached out and took the sandwich from his hand. Her fingers were thin, delicate, and trembled slightly as they closed around the bread. She brought the sandwich close to her face and inhaled deeply, as if committing the scent to memory. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and rasping, like wind through dry leaves. Her grasp of human language was surprisingly good, though her accent was thick and unfamiliar. "Thank you, young one." "No problem," Ethan said. He started to stand, figuring that was the end of the interaction, but something made him pause. "Are you okay? Do you need anything else? Water, maybe?" The woman took a small bite of the sandwich and chewed slowly, savoring it. When she swallowed, she looked up at Ethan with those luminous amber eyes, and for just a moment, he felt as though she was seeing right through him. "You are kind," she said. "Kindness is rare in this place." Ethan shrugged, a little embarrassed. "It is just a sandwich. No big deal." "It is always a big deal," the woman replied. She took another bite, and Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly. "More than you know." Ethan did not really know what to say to that, so he just nodded. "Well, take care of yourself, okay?" He turned to head back to his crate, but the woman's voice stopped him. "What is your name, young one?" Ethan glanced back. "Ethan. Ethan Cole." The woman nodded slowly, as if committing the name to memory. "I will remember that. Ethan Cole." There was something about the way she said it, something almost ceremonial, that gave Ethan a strange feeling. But he shook it off, gave her a little wave, and returned to his spot on the crate. His stomach growled in protest, but he ignored it. He would grab something from the commissary later. The rest of his shift passed in the usual blur of repairs and maintenance. He fixed a malfunctioning airlock seal, rerouted some power cables, and helped a Dorvian cargo handler locate a shipment that had been misplaced in the lower storage bays. By the time his shift ended, Ethan had forgotten all about the old alien woman and the sandwich. It was 3 days later when things started to get strange. Ethan was in the middle of replacing a faulty circuit panel in one of the station's residential sections when his communicator buzzed. He pulled it out, expecting another maintenance request, but instead saw a message from station administration. That was unusual. Maintenance workers did not typically get direct communications from admin. The message was terse. "Report to admin level, Office 12. Immediately. Ethan frowned. Office 12. He did not even know what Office 12 was. Admin level was where the station's command staff worked, the people who actually ran Meridian. Maintenance workers did not go up there unless something had gone very, very wrong. His mind raced through the possibilities. Had he screwed something up? Broken something important? But no, he was careful with his work. He always double-checked his repairs. With a sinking feeling in his stomach, Ethan made his way to the nearest lift and took it up to admin level. The transition from the grimy, industrial sections of the station to the polished corridors of admin was jarring. Everything up here was clean, bright, and expensive-looking. The people who passed him in the halls wore crisp uniforms or elegant robes, and more than one of them gave him odd looks, as if wondering what a grease-stained maintenance worker was doing on their level. He found Office 12 and hesitated outside the door. Then he took a deep breath and hit the access panel. The door slid open, revealing a spacious office with a view of the starfield beyond the station. Behind a sleek desk sat a Velosian administrator, a tall, insectoid species with multifaceted eyes and mandibles that clicked softly as they spoke. "Ethan Cole," the administrator asked, though it was clearly not a question. "Yes, sir," Ethan said, standing as straight as he could despite his nervousness. The administrator studied him for a moment. its mandibles clicking in what might have been curiosity. You are to report to docking bay 7 immediately. A shuttle is waiting for you. Ethan blinked. A shuttle? I do not understand. Did I do something wrong? Wrong? The administrator's mandibles clicked again, faster this time. No, Mr. Cole. Quite the opposite. You have been summoned. Summoned? By who? The administrator hesitated, as if uncertain how to answer. By someone very important. That is all I am authorized to tell you. Go to docking bay 7. Do not delay. Ethan wanted to ask more questions, but the administrator's tone made it clear the conversation was over. Confused and more than a little anxious, Ethan left the office and made his way to docking bay 7. When he arrived, he found a sleek shuttle waiting, the kind of vessel that screamed wealth and power. It was unmarked, but its hull gleamed with a polished perfection that spoke of meticulous care. 2 guards stood at the entrance, both heavily armed and wearing armor that Ethan did not recognize. Ethan Cole, one of them asked. That is me, Ethan replied cautiously. The guard stepped aside. Board the shuttle. You will be briefed en route. En route to where? Ethan asked, but the guard did not answer. With no other choice, Ethan climbed aboard. The interior of the shuttle was even more luxurious than the exterior. Plush seating, ambient lighting, and a viewport that offered a stunning view of the stars. Ethan felt completely out of place, like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. The shuttle lifted off smoothly, and Ethan watched as Meridian Station shrank behind them. They were moving fast, faster than any shuttle he had ever been on. After a few minutes, a holographic display flickered to life in front of him, showing the face of a stern-looking Torvian woman. Mr. Cole, she said, her voice crisp and professional. I am Captain Rellis. You are being transported to the flagship of the matriarch. Upon arrival, you will be escorted to a private audience. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not touch anything. And above all, show the utmost respect. The matriarch? Ethan repeated, his confusion deepening. Who is the matriarch? Captain Rellis's expression suggested she could not quite believe he had just asked that question. The matriarch is the sovereign ruler of the Erathian sovereignty, one of the most powerful entities in the known galaxy. You will address her as your eminence. The hologram winked out before Ethan could ask anything else. He sat back in his seat, his mind reeling. The Erathian sovereignty? He had heard of them, of course. Everyone had. They controlled vast swathes of space, commanded fleets that could level planets, and wielded economic power that made entire star systems tremble. And now, apparently, their ruler wanted to see him. But why? The shuttle journey took less than an hour, but to Ethan it felt like an eternity, every minute stretching out as his mind raced with possibilities and fears. The viewport showed the stars sliding past, brilliant points of light against the infinite black of space. Ethan had grown up among the stars, had spent most of his adult life in space, but he had never quite gotten over the sense of awe that came from looking out at the cosmos. The sheer scale of it, the countless worlds and civilizations, the mysteries that remained unsolved. It was humbling, in the best possible way. The interior of the shuttle was more luxurious than anything Ethan had ever experienced. The seats were upholstered in some kind of soft material that seemed to mold itself to his body, providing support in exactly the right places. The lighting was adjustable, shifting from bright white to a softer amber glow at his touch. There was even a small refreshment station with drinks and snacks, though Ethan found he had no appetite. His stomach was tied in knots, anxiety overriding his hunger. He tried to distract himself by examining the shuttle's interior more closely. The walls were paneled in what looked like real wood, a rich, dark material with visible grain patterns. Wood was incredibly rare in space, prohibitively expensive to transport, which meant that whoever owned this shuttle had wealth beyond Ethan's comprehension. There were decorative elements too, small sculptures and paintings that were clearly original art, not mass-produced reproductions. Everything about the shuttle screamed power, wealth, and status. When they finally docked, he was escorted through corridors that made admin level on Meridian look like a maintenance closet. These corridors were wide enough to drive a small vehicle through, with high ceilings adorned with intricate moldings and chandeliers that cast a warm, golden light. The floors were polished to a mirror shine, some kind of stone or marble that reflected his image back at him. The walls were decorated with tapestries and paintings, each one clearly a priceless work of art. Every few meters there were alcoves containing sculptures or display cases filled with artifacts that Ethan did not recognize, but that radiated historical significance. The guards led him through a series of security checkpoints, each one more intense than the last. At the first checkpoint, he was scanned for weapons and explosives. At the second, his identity was verified through multiple biometric checks, retinal scans, fingerprints, DNA analysis. At the third, he was questioned by a stern-faced security officer who wanted to know the purpose of his visit, his relationship to the matriarch, and whether he was carrying any recording devices. Ethan answered as honestly as he could, though he still did not fully understand why he was there. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they arrived at a massive set of doors. The doors were easily 5 meters tall and 3 meters wide, made from some kind of metal that gleamed like silver but was probably much more valuable. They were covered in intricate engravings, scenes that depicted battles and celebrations, coronations and treaties, the history of a civilization carved into metal with exquisite detail. The guards took up positions on either side of the doors, their hands resting on their weapons. One of them spoke into a communication device, his voice too quiet for Ethan to hear. There was a pause, then a deep, resonant chime echoed from beyond the doors. The doors opened, swinging inward with a smooth, silent motion that spoke of perfect engineering. Beyond them lay a chamber that could only be described as a throne room. It was vast, easily 100 meters from the doors to the far wall, with a vaulted ceiling that rose 30 meters overhead. The ceiling was painted with elaborate frescoes, scenes of cosmic grandeur, stars and planets, and nebulae rendered in stunning detail. The walls were lined with columns, each one carved from a single piece of stone and polished until it gleamed. Between the columns hung banners in rich colors, crimson and gold and deep purple, each one bearing symbols that Ethan did not recognize but that clearly held significance. The floor was made from polished stone, the same material as the columns, with intricate inlays creating geometric patterns that drew the eye toward the far end of the chamber. Along the walls stood more guards, dozens of them, all wearing ornate armor and carrying weapons that looked both ceremonial and deadly. Their eyes tracked Ethan as he entered, but none of them moved. At the far end of the room, on a raised dais, sat a figure on a throne. The throne itself was a work of art, carved from what looked like a single massive crystal that caught the light and refracted it into rainbow patterns. The figure sitting on it was draped in flowing robes of deep crimson and gold, fabrics so fine they seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. As Ethan approached, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples, the figure came into focus. And then he stopped dead in his tracks, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. It was her, the old alien woman from the docking platform, the one he had given his sandwich to 3 days ago, the beggar who had been invisible to everyone except him. Except she did not look like a beggar anymore. She was dressed in robes that probably cost more than Ethan would earn in his entire lifetime. Fabrics that flowed like liquid, colors that seemed to glow. Her posture was regal, her back straight, her head held high. The lines on her skin, which had seemed like wrinkles of age and hardship, now looked almost like elegant tattoos, glowing faintly in the light, creating patterns that were both beautiful and slightly unsettling. Her amber eyes, which had been dulled by hunger and exhaustion on the docking platform, now blazed with an inner fire, sharp and penetrating and utterly commanding. She looked like what she was, a ruler, a power, someone who commanded the loyalty of billions and the fear of countless more. Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came out. He felt like his brain had short-circuited, unable to reconcile the image of the desperate beggar with the regal figure before him. It was impossible. It could not be the same person. And yet, those eyes were unmistakable. Those luminous amber eyes that had stared at his sandwich with such naked hunger. "Approach," the woman said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the chamber. It was the same voice, but now it held a weight of authority that had not been there before. Or perhaps it had always been there, and Ethan had simply not noticed. Ethan forced his legs to move. He walked forward until he was standing at the base of the dais, looking up at the woman who, according to Captain Release, was the ruler of one of the most powerful factions in the galaxy. He began, then stopped. He did not know what to say. The woman smiled, a small, enigmatic expression. Yes, Ethan Cole. It is me. You are the matriarch, Ethan said, the words tumbling out. You own the Arathian sovereignty. You rule over billions of people. And you were sitting on a docking platform on Meridian Station, looking like a beggar. I was not looking like a beggar, the matriarch said, her tone mildly reproachful. I was a beggar. For a time. But why? Ethan asked. Why would someone like you pretend to be homeless? The matriarch leaned back in her throne, her gaze thoughtful, and for a moment she looked tired, as if the weight of her position pressed down on her despite the grandeur surrounding them. Tell me, Ethan Cole, how much do you know about the Arathian sovereignty? Ethan shrugged helplessly, feeling completely out of his depth in this magnificent chamber, standing before one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Not much, he admitted. I know you are powerful. I know you control a lot of territory. I know that when the Arathians speak, other factions listen. That is about it. I am just a maintenance worker. Galactic politics is not really my area. The matriarch nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, as if his honesty amused her. The Arathian sovereignty is indeed powerful, she said, her voice taking on a quality that suggested she had given this speech before, perhaps many times. We have existed for over 3,000 years, since before humanity left its birth world and ventured into the stars. We have seen empires rise from nothing and fall into dust. We have fought wars that consumed entire star systems, and we have brokered peace treaties that saved countless lives. We have accumulated wealth beyond measure, resources that could feed entire civilizations for generations. Our fleets number in the thousands. Our territories span hundreds of light years, and our influence reaches into every corner of the known galaxy. She paused, her amber eyes distant, as if looking back across the centuries of her rule. But power and wealth have a way of distorting perspective, Ethan Cole. When you rule from a throne, when you are surrounded by guards and courtiers, when every person you meet treats you as if you are more than mortal, it becomes easy to forget what life is truly like for the ordinary beings who make up the galaxy. It becomes easy to lose touch with reality. She stood then, rising from her throne with a fluid grace that belied her apparent age, and despite her relatively small stature, she seemed to fill the room with her presence. I have ruled the sovereignty for over 2 centuries, Ethan Cole. 200 years of sitting on this throne, of making decisions that affect billions of lives, of weighing the fate of worlds in my hands. In that time, I have been surrounded by advisors who tell me what they think I want to hear, by generals who see every problem as an excuse for war, by diplomats who speak in carefully crafted lies designed to advance their own agendas, by sycophants who praise my wisdom and beauty while secretly plotting how to benefit from my favor. Her voice grew harder, edged with a bitterness that surprised Ethan. Everyone I meet wants something from me. Trade agreements, military alliances, territorial concessions, justice for some perceived wrong, vengeance against an enemy, wealth, power, status. Everyone has an agenda. Everyone is calculating how to use me to achieve their goals. And over the years, I began to wonder if I had lost touch with the galaxy I was supposed to govern. I began to wonder if anyone, anywhere, would show kindness to a stranger without expecting something in return. So you decided to pretend to be a beggar? Ethan asked, still struggling to wrap his mind around the concept. You, one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, disguised yourself as a homeless person and went wandering around a space station? Not pretend, the matriarch corrected firmly. I truly was a beggar. I left my flagship in secret, with no guards, no wealth, no power. I wore the clothes of a pauper and carried nothing of value. I wanted to see the galaxy as it truly is, not as it is presented to me in carefully edited reports and glowing briefings. I wanted to know if there was still kindness in the universe, or if everyone had become as calculating and selfish as those who fill my court. And what did you find? Ethan asked. The matriarch smiled again, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. I found that most people ignored me. They walked past as if I did not exist. Some even went out of their way to avoid me, as if poverty were contagious. I spent days on that docking platform, hungry and cold, watching thousands of beings pass by. Not one of them stopped to help. Until you, she added, her gaze locking onto Ethan's. I just gave you a sandwich, Ethan said weakly. It was not a big deal. You gave me more than a sandwich, the matriarch said. You gave me your lunch. Your only meal. You did not know who I was. You did not expect anything in return. You saw someone in need, and you helped. That, Ethan Cole, is what I was searching for. And I found it in the most unlikely of places. In a human maintenance worker on a crowded docking platform. Ethan did not know what to say. He felt like he was in the middle of a dream, or possibly a nightmare. This could not be real. The matriarch descended from the dais, walking toward him with slow, deliberate steps. When she stopped in front of him, she reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. I told you I would remember your name, Ethan Cole, she said. And I have. You have shown me something that I had nearly forgotten. That kindness still exists. That there are still people in this galaxy who care about others, even when it costs them something. She turned and walked back to her throne, but did not sit. Instead, she gestured to one of the guards standing at the edge of the room. The guard stepped forward and handed her a small, ornate box. This is for you, the matriarch said, holding the box out to Ethan. Ethan took the box, his hands trembling slightly. He opened it and found inside a medallion, intricately crafted from a metal that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. The design was complex, with symbols that Ethan did not recognize. That is a token of the matriarch, she explained. There are only 12 in existence. It grants you a single request, anything within my power to give. If you ever need something, anything at all, present that token to any representative of the Erathian sovereignty, and your request will be honored. Ethan stared at the medallion, unable to process what he was hearing. This is too much, he said. I cannot accept this. I just gave you a sandwich. And I am giving you a token, the matriarch replied. Consider it a fair trade. But, Ethan began, but the matriarch held up a hand, silencing him. I do not give this lightly, Ethan Cole. You may not understand the significance now, but one day you might. Keep it. And remember, kindness is never wasted. Ethan closed the box, still in a daze. He looked up at the matriarch, searching for something to say that could possibly match the magnitude of what was happening. Thank you, he finally managed. I do not know what else to say. You do not need to say anything, the matriarch replied. Just continue to be the person you are. The galaxy needs more people like you. She gestured to the guards. Escort Mr. Cole back to his shuttle, and ensure he arrives safely at Meridian Station. The guards moved forward, and Ethan allowed himself to be led out of the throne room. As he walked back through the opulent corridors, clutching the box with the medallion inside, he felt like he was floating. When he finally returned to Meridian Station, it was late in the evening, station time. He made his way back to his small quarters, a cramped room barely large enough for a bed and a locker. He sat down on the bed and opened the box again, staring at the medallion. It had really happened. He had met the ruler of the Erathian sovereignty. He had been given a token that could grant him almost anything he wanted. And all because he had shared his sandwich. Ethan laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed in the small room. It was absurd. It was impossible. And yet, it was real. Over the next few weeks, life on Meridian Station continued as usual for Ethan, at least on the surface. He went back to his maintenance work, crawling through access tunnels and fixing broken equipment, repairing environmental systems, and patching hull breaches. The familiar routine was comforting in a way, a return to normalcy after the surreal experience of meeting the matriarch. He did not tell anyone about what had happened. Who would believe him? A maintenance worker, summoned to the flagship of the Erathian sovereignty, given a personal audience with one of the most powerful rulers in the galaxy? It sounded like a fantasy, the kind of story someone would make up to feel important. But he kept the medallion, hidden in his locker beneath his spare uniforms and personal belongings, a constant reminder that it had not been a dream. Sometimes, late at night when he could not sleep, he would take it out and hold it, turning it over in his hands, marveling at the craftsmanship and the weight of what it represented. A single request, anything within the matriarch's power to give. It was a responsibility that felt both empowering and terrifying. What could he possibly ask for that would be worthy of such a gift? And what if he used it frivolously, wasting an opportunity that might save lives someday? One day, About a month after his visit to the Matriarch's flagship, Ethan was working in one of the station's lower levels, a section that housed some of the less reputable establishments and cheaper residential areas. The lower levels were where people went when they had nowhere else to go, when their luck had run out or they were trying to hide from something. The lighting was dimmer here. More of the panels had burned out and not been replaced, and the air had a musty quality that spoke of inadequate circulation. There was graffiti on the walls, messages in a dozen different languages, some artistic, some crude, all of them expressing the frustrations and dreams of people living on the margins. He was in the middle of replacing a faulty circuit panel, his tools spread out around him on the deck, when he heard shouting. The voices were angry, threatening, coming from somewhere around the corner in one of the residential corridors. Ethan's first instinct was to mind his own business. The lower levels could be dangerous, and getting involved in other people's problems was a good way to end up hurt. But something about the voices made him pause, something about the quality of fear he heard underlying the anger. He gathered up his tools quickly, stowing them in his belt, and moved cautiously toward the sound. As he rounded the corner, he saw a scene that made his blood run cold. A group of 5 Dorvian thugs had cornered a young Kelton woman against the wall of the corridor. The Dorvians were big, muscular, their segmented exoskeletons giving them a natural armor that made them formidable in a fight. They wore street clothes, but Ethan could see the glint of weapons tucked into their belts, knives and possibly energy pistols. The Kelton woman was small, delicate, her iridescent skin pale with fear. She was clutching a small bag to her chest, probably everything she owned in the world, and her large eyes were wide with terror. The lead Dorvian was doing the talking, his voice harsh and grating, speaking in heavily accented common. "You walk through our territory, you pay the toll," he was saying. "That is the rule. You know the rule." "I do not have any money," the Kelton woman said, her voice trembling. "Please, I am just trying to get to my quarters. I do not want any trouble." "No money?" The Dorvian laughed, a sound like metal scraping on stone. "Then maybe you pay some other way. We find something you can give us." The other Dorvians laughed too, and the implication in their voices made Ethan's stomach turn. The Kelton woman pressed herself against the wall, looking desperately for an escape route, but the Dorvians had her boxed in. There was nowhere for her to go. Ethan's first instinct was still to walk away. This was not his problem. He was just a maintenance worker. These Dorvians were clearly part of one of the gangs that controlled the lower levels, and interfering with gang business was incredibly dangerous. But then he thought about the matriarch's words, about kindness and compassion, about choosing to help even when it cost something. He thought about the old woman on the docking platform, hungry and ignored by everyone except him. He thought about the kind of person he wanted to be. He stepped forward, his heart pounding, but his voice steady. "Hey," he said, loud enough to get their attention. "Leave her alone." The Dorvians turned to look at him, and Ethan immediately regretted his decision. They were even bigger up close, easily twice his weight, with muscles that bulged beneath their exoskeletons. The lead Dorvian looked at him with an expression that was equal parts surprise and amusement, as if he could not quite believe what he was seeing. "Or what, human?" the Dorvian asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "You will stop us? You?" Ethan did not have an answer to that. He was not a fighter. He had never been in a real fight in his life, unless you counted a few drunken shoving matches in his youth. He had no weapon except for the tools on his belt, and a wrench was not much use against 5 armed thugs. But he stood his ground, refusing to back down, even as every instinct screamed at him to run. "I am asking you to leave her alone," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "She said she does not have any money. Just let her go." The lead Dorvian stepped closer, towering over Ethan, his breath hot and smelling of something acrid. "Walk away, little human," he said, his voice low and menacing. "This does not concern you. Walk away before you get hurt." For a moment, it looked like the situation was about to turn violent. The other Dorvians were tensing, their hands moving toward their weapons. The Kelton woman was watching with wide, terrified eyes. Ethan could feel his heart racing, adrenaline flooding his system, his body preparing for fight or flight. But then one of the other Dorvians grabbed the leader's arm and whispered something urgently in his ear. The leader's eyes widened, and he looked at Ethan with a mixture of shock and something that might have been fear. "You are Cole," the leader said, and it was not a question. It was a statement, delivered with a sudden, unexpected respect. "Ethan Cole, the one with the matriarch's token." Ethan blinked in surprise, completely thrown by the sudden change in tone. "How do you know about that?" he asked. "Everyone knows," the Dwarvian said, his earlier aggression evaporating like mist. "Word spreads fast, especially in the lower levels. You are under the matriarch's protection. To harm you would bring the wrath of the Erathian sovereignty down on us." The Dwarvians backed away from both Ethan and the Kelton woman, their body language shifting from threatening to deferential in the space of a few seconds. "We meant no disrespect," the leader said, actually sounding genuine in his apology. "We did not know you were here. We will leave." And just like that, they were gone, disappearing down the corridor and leaving Ethan and the Kelton woman alone. The woman stared at Ethan in awe, her terror slowly giving way to relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice still trembling but stronger now. "You saved me. I do not know how to repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Ethan said, still trying to process what had just happened. "Just be safe, okay? Maybe avoid the lower levels for a while." The woman nodded vigorously, then hurried away, clutching her bag and glancing back over her shoulder at Ethan as if he were some kind of guardian angel. Which, Ethan supposed, he might as well have been, at least from her perspective. Ethan stood there for a moment, alone in the dimly lit corridor, trying to understand what had just occurred. The Dwarvians had known about the token. "Everyone knows," the leader had said. "Word spreads fast." But how? Ethan had not told anyone. He had kept it secret, locked away in his locker where no one could see it. And yet, somehow, the story had gotten out. Over the following months, Ethan began to notice a change, subtle at first, but growing more pronounced with time. People treated him differently. Station security officers, who had previously ignored him or treated him as just another worker, now nodded respectfully when he passed. Merchants in the various markets and shops offered him discounts without being asked, as if his business was particularly valuable to them. Even his supervisor, a perpetually grumpy Velosian who had a reputation for piling work on anyone who could not say no, stopped assigning him the worst jobs. It was as if the entire station had collectively decided that Ethan Cole was someone important, someone who deserved respect and consideration. It was strange and more than a little uncomfortable. Ethan had not asked for any of this. He had just given an old woman his sandwich. But he also began to understand what the matriarch had been trying to teach him. Kindness mattered. It rippled outward in ways that were impossible to predict. His single act of generosity had not only changed his own life, but had also sent a message to everyone who heard the story. That even in a galaxy full of cynicism and self-interest, there was still value in helping others. One evening, as Ethan was finishing his shift, his communicator buzzed. It was a message from an unknown sender, but the encryption signature was one he recognized. It was from the matriarch. The message was brief. "Ethan Cole, I wanted you to know that the story of your kindness has spread far beyond Meridian Station. It has reached the highest levels of the Galactic Coalition. You have become a symbol, a reminder that humanity, despite being a relatively young species, understands something that many older civilizations have forgotten. That true strength lies not in power or wealth, but in compassion. You have honored me, and I am proud to call you a friend. May your path be ever bright." Ethan read the message twice, then 3 times. A friend. The matriarch, one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, considered him a friend. He smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. Then he closed the communicator and headed back to his quarters. The galaxy was a vast, complicated place, full of wonders and dangers. Ethan was still just a maintenance worker, crawling through access tunnels and fixing broken equipment. But now he knew something that he had not known before, that even the smallest person could make a difference. That kindness was never wasted, and that sometimes sharing your sandwich could change the galaxy. Years passed, and Ethan's life on Meridian Station continued. He never used the matriarch's token, though he kept it close, a reminder of the day his life had changed. He continued his work, helping people when he could, and living quietly. But the story of Ethan Cole and the matriarch spread throughout the galaxy. It was told in bars and spaceports, in council chambers and classrooms. It became a legend, a story that parents told their children to teach them the value of kindness. And in the halls of the Erathian sovereignty, the matriarch kept a small, simple sandwich wrapper in a display case. It was preserved in stasis, never aging, a symbol of the moment she had rediscovered hope in the galaxy. Ethan never knew about the sandwich wrapper, but he would have appreciated the gesture. One day, many years later, Ethan received word that the matriarch had passed away. She had lived a long life, even by Erathian standards, and her death was mourned across the galaxy. Ethan felt a deep sadness at the news. He had only met her once, but that brief encounter had shaped his entire life. A few days after the announcement, a ship arrived at Meridian Station. It carried an envoy from the Erathian sovereignty, along with a sealed letter addressed to Ethan Cole. With trembling hands, Ethan opened the letter. Inside was a handwritten note, the script elegant and flowing. "Ethan Cole," it read, "by the time you read this, I will be gone. But I wanted you to know that meeting you was one of the greatest moments of my long life. You reminded me that the galaxy is worth protecting, that there is still goodness to be found in the most unexpected places. I have left instructions for my successor. The Erathian sovereignty will always honor the memory of your kindness. And should you or your descendants ever need assistance, they need only present the token I gave you. Thank you, Ethan Cole, for sharing your sandwich with an old woman. It meant more to me than you will ever know. May the stars guide you always." The note was signed simply, "The Matriarch." Ethan folded the letter carefully and placed it in his locker, next to the medallion. He sat down on his bed and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He had been right. All those years ago on the docking platform, it had been just a sandwich. Nothing fancy, nothing special. But it had been given freely, with no expectation of reward. And sometimes, that was all it took to change the galaxy. Ethan went back to work the next day, as he always did. He fixed a malfunctioning air filter, rerouted some power cables, and helped a stranded trader find lodging. It was ordinary work, the kind of thing he had been doing for years. But Ethan understood now that there was no such thing as ordinary. Every action, every choice, every moment of kindness had the potential to ripple outward, touching lives in ways that could never be fully known. He had shared his sandwich with an old alien woman, never knowing she owned the galaxy. And in doing so, he had learned the most important lesson of all, that humanity's greatest strength was not its technology, or its ingenuity, or its resilience. It was its capacity for compassion, for seeing someone in need and choosing to help, even when there was nothing to gain. And that, Ethan thought as he climbed into another access tunnel, wrench in hand, was something worth celebrating. Because in a galaxy full of empires and armies, of politics and power struggles, it was the simple acts of kindness that truly mattered. It was the people who cared, who helped, who gave without expectation of reward. It was people like Ethan Cole, and as long as there were people like him, humanity would always have a place among the stars. The story of Ethan and the Matriarch became one of the most famous tales in human history. It was taught in schools, referenced in diplomatic negotiations, and retold countless times across the galaxy. It became a symbol of what humanity could be at its best: generous, compassionate, and kind. And somewhere, in the heart of the Erathian sovereignty, in a place of honor, a simple sandwich wrapper remained preserved. A testament to the day an old woman, disguised as a beggar, had her faith in the galaxy restored by a maintenance worker who simply wanted to help. Ethan lived a long and fulfilling life. He never became famous, never sought recognition. He continued his work on Meridian Station, helping people wherever he could, and living according to the lesson the Matriarch had taught him. That kindness was never wasted. When Ethan finally passed away, decades later, his funeral was attended by thousands. Representatives from every major faction in the galaxy came to pay their respects, including the new matriarch of the Erathian sovereignty. The new matriarch stood at Ethan's memorial and spoke to the assembled crowd. Ethan Cole was not a warrior, she said. He was not a diplomat or a scientist. He was a maintenance worker. But he understood something that many of us forget, that the measure of a person is not found in their power or their wealth, but in their willingness to help others. Ethan Cole changed the galaxy with a single sandwich. Let us all strive to live by his example." The crowd murmured in agreement, and the matriarch placed a wreath at the memorial. It was woven from flowers that grew on her homeworld, a gesture of the highest respect. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, a young human woman approached the memorial. She was Ethan's granddaughter, and she carried with her the medallion he had kept all those years, the token of the matriarch. She looked at it, turning it over in her hands, and wondered if she would ever need to use it. But then she remembered her grandfather's stories, his lessons about kindness and compassion, and she decided that the medallion was not meant to be used. It was meant to be a reminder, a symbol of the incredible impact that one person could have if they chose to care. She placed the medallion in a small case at the base of the memorial, where it would remain for generations to come. A testament to the day Ethan Cole shared his sandwich with an old alien woman, never knowing she owned the galaxy. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.